Hello everyone, welcome to the consent lesson. We are Teen Council and we are a peer education program through Mount Baker Planned Parenthood. Teen Council's goal is to help people have relationships that are healthy, safe, and fun. During today's video, we will be talking about consent during sexual activity. Usually, we provide this lesson in the classroom and have interactive activities that go along with it, but due to recent events, we've had to change our lessons up a little bit and able to provide them through people's online classes at home. Hopefully it will still be engaging and entertaining for you. Now, even if you aren't sexually active at this time, consent is still really important to learn about in order to have healthy, safe relationships in the future or to even help out your friends now. You might even learn some skills to help with communicating your boundaries in any situation.
Hi, my name is Lilith. I use she, her pronouns. I am in Whatcom Teen Council and I am a sophomore at Bellingham High School.
Hello, my name is Adia, and I'm from Skagit Teen Council. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a senior at Mount Vernon High School.
Hi, I'm McKinley. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Whatcom TC, and I'm a junior at Seahome High School.
Hello, my name is Lupita. I use they, she pronouns. I am from Skagit Teen Council, and I'm currently a junior at Mount Vernon High School.
Now, before we get started with the lesson, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Teen Council itself. Now, I personally joined Teen Council because they came into my classroom my sophomore year and taught this same exact consent lesson, and I thought the information that they provided was just really important and not something that you usually would find in a health class, but it really should be. And so I decided to join them to help spread this message. In Teen Council, we have weekly meetings where we all meet up and we have dinner, and then we go over our lessons, and we also learn some really important information about other topics relating to sexual health. Now, in Teen Council, we provide 4 lessons. Within high schools, we teach consent, gender and sexuality, and protection. We also provide a 4th lesson called Keeping It Real with Your Patients to healthcare providers. Now, another part of what we do as Teen Council members is individual education. This just means that any of our peers can come up to us as Teen Council members and ask us any questions that they need relating to sexual health or really just anything. And we will answer to the best of our ability, and if not, we can direct them to somebody else that would be able to help them better than we can. And another amazing part of what we get to do as Teen Council members is Teen Lobby Day. Now, this is when all of the teen councils in Washington go to the Capitol in Olympia during Martin Luther King Day weekend, and we talk to our state's representatives and senators about bills that are really important to Planned Parenthood and to Teen Council in general, and it's so much fun, one of my favorite parts of being in Teen Council.
We have some group agreements we'd like to say before we get started. So first is just get comfortable, so find a space where you feel comfortable and remain engaged, and it might help to remove any distractions from your environment, and we suggest setting your phone in another room or turning it on Do Not Disturb. Send us your questions. If at any point you have a question during our lesson, you can either submit it anonymously through the link we've provided to your teacher, or you can send us a direct message on Instagram at Whatcom_Teen Council or Skagit_Teen Council. Today we're going to be talking about consent. I want you to pause for a second and think about what the word means to you. A pretty general definition of consent would be permission to do something. But during this lesson, we're going to be talking about sexual consent. But consent is important in other situations as well. For example, a doctor needs consent to practice medicine on an individual. And it's a good idea to ask your friends for consent before posting a photo of them on social media. Consent is also important for borrowing things and so much more. Consent is something that we hope everyone gets the freedom to exercise and exists in healthy sexual experiences. But there are situations of abuse where a person doesn't get the opportunity, and we recognize that. Today we're focusing on situations in which a person is able to express their consent.
Let's start off by further defining consent. On the screen you should see 4 possible definitions of consent, and we want you to choose the one that you think is the best definition. The 4 definitions are when there is a verbal yes from each person, when each person is into what's happening sexually, when body language, nonverbal cues is clear, and the 4th one is it's a process. Consent of one thing does not equal consent of something else. Which one do you think is the best definition of consent? So consent is actually a combination of all of these things. And the way consent is navigated and communicated may look different with different people. So you might be wondering, why is consent important to learn about and practice? Well, you should care about your partner's consent and pleasure because sex should be an enjoyable experience for all parties involved.
We now encourage you to pause this video and follow the link that we've provided so you can watch the Would You Like a Cup of Tea video. This video does a really great job of explaining consent in a fun way. Another way to look at consent is through using the acronym FRIES. Starting off with F, we have freely given. Doing something sexual with someone is a decision that should be made without pressure, threat, or manipulation. R is for reversible. Anyone can change their mind about what they want to do at any time, even if they've done it before or are in the middle of having sex. I is for informed. This means that a person knows exactly what they're consenting to, and it might include being aware of a partner's STI status, preferred protection, and birth control methods. E is for enthusiastic. Everyone should be enjoying what's going on. And finally, S is for specific. Saying yes to one thing, like going to the bedroom to make out, doesn't mean you've said yes to other things. This requires a person to self-reflect about their boundaries, what they're comfortable with, or what they're interested in trying.
So consent isn't one specific thing. Different people express consent differently. So we're going to give you some examples of what consent might look like. But first we're going to split consent into a few different categories. So there are seeking consent, giving consent, and non-consent. Seeking consent is when a person asks their partner for consent. This doesn't necessarily mean that consent has been established, but it's really important to learn how to ask someone for consent, so we want to give you some ideas. Giving consent is when a person gives their partner permission or expresses consent. Non-consent is when it's clear that one person is not into what's happening or other activities that do not equal sexual consent. Consent is necessary for many things, but for this activity, we're talking specifically about consent to touch someone or engage in sexual activity with them. To start off, we get so many questions about flirting. If someone is flirting, does that mean you have consent to touch them? No. You might think someone is flirting and they're just being nice. Or sometimes people want to flirt, but without wanting to do anything physical. So let's start with seeking consent. These are some examples of what it might sound like if a person was asking another person for consent before or during sexual activity. So this may include, does that feel good? Is this okay? Can I kiss you? I'm interested in trying this. What do you think? Again, this does not mean that they automatically have consent. It depends on the other person's answer.
The next category is giving consent. If someone is giving another person consent to sexual activity, that might sound like, yes, keep going, that feels good, or I would love to. This is not a comprehensive list, just a couple of examples of what a person could say if they were expressing consent. Our last category is non-consent. If a person expresses non-consent, then they are not into what is happening, and the other person should stop what they are doing immediately. Some examples of non-consent are flirting or wearing revealing clothing, as those do not give another person permission to touch. The same goes for a situation if both people are sexually aroused. Arousal is the body's response and doesn't always correlate with what a person wants. Just because a person's body is experiencing arousal doesn't mean that they want to have sex or they want to be touched. It is still important to ask. Being silent and pushing away is another example of non-verbal cues that a person is not enjoying what's going on. A verbal no after a yes was given earlier is another example of non-consent. Think of the R in rise. Reversible. People are allowed to change their mind at any time. No and can we slow down are also verbal examples of non-consent, as the person is expressing that they are not comfortable with the situation.
A question we always get is, what if the other person says maybe or I guess so? Is that a yes? Those responses are unclear answers and there is no such thing as unclear consent. If a person sounds unsure, that is when you need to take a step back and have a conversation about what their boundaries are and what they're into. Remember that people have different communication skills and styles. Paying attention to what the other person and yourself is communicating with their non-verbal body language is just as important as listening to the words being said. Even if a person says yes to something but visibly seems uncomfortable, that is certainly a red light and a further conversation should happen. There should always be a discussion to establish what is and what is not consent. We all deserve that respect.
So now we're going to look at the laws regarding consent in Washington state. So a person should know about the legality of consent, but more importantly, a person should care about consent because they respect their partner and their partner's boundaries and pleasure. So the legal definition of consent in Washington state. So consent to any sexual activity must be clear, knowing, and voluntary. Anything less is equivalent to a no. So consent is active. Silence is not consent. Sexual activity is non-consensual when a person is asleep or physically unable to communicate their unwillingness to engage in sexual activity. We are going to review the laws in Washington state regarding age of consent for sex. This is true even if both people say yes. So in Washington state, the age of consent is 16 years old. So this means that at this age, a person can consent to sex with any other adult, regardless of age difference between them, as long as the older person is not in a position of power over the younger person, such as a teacher or a coach. It is illegal for a person in a position of authority to have a sexual relationship with any youth they supervise. This means that school employees must not have a sexual relationship with any enrolled student, even if the student has reached the age of consent.
These laws are important because school employees have built-in power over students, making it easier for a student to be manipulated into a sexual relationship. Also, coaches, bosses, youth group leaders, and other adults in position of authority over teens cannot engage in a sexual relationship with young people under the age of 18. These laws, called sexual misconduct, are in place to protect teens from experiencing coercion and abuse by adults with more systematic power. Going on to age differences. Let's look at the laws for teens under the age of 16. Teens younger than 16 may give sexual consent as long as the partners are close in age. The law says that if the person is younger than 12 years old, the older person must be within 2 years of age. If the person is 12 or 13, the older person must be within 3 years of age. And if the person is 14 or 15, the older person must be within 4 years of age. If the age difference is too large, consent cannot be given legally.
It's difficult to talk about consent without talking about alcohol. We've put together a list of the most frequently asked questions we get from teens about how consent and drinking are related. We need to talk about this today because while it's difficult to give and seek consent under the influence, does it happen? Yes. So first, is sex always non-consensual when people have been drinking or doing drugs? Sometimes people can have consensual sex after having a drink or two, but most of the time consent cannot be given when alcohol is involved because it affects the ability to communicate clearly. If you or your partner has been drinking, make sure to check in regularly, more than usual, by asking things like, do you still want to do this? Is this okay? Do you need to take a break? Are you having fun? Or what do you want to do next? Make sure to check in. How can you tell if someone is too intoxicated to consent? You need to ask yourself, can this person communicate clearly? Are they coherent? Are they sober enough to 100% consent to what is going on? Don't try to convince yourself that someone is less drunk than they appear to be. What if someone said no to sex when sober, but then said yes when intoxicated? Alcohol and drugs significantly lower inhibitions, so in that situation, it's best to wait until the person sobers up and then check in again about whether or not they really want to have sex. What if we're in a relationship? Romantic or sexual involvement doesn't ever give you permission to have sex with someone who is incapacitated. Many sexual assaults occur within the context of a relationship. What if you're both intoxicated? It is really difficult to tell if someone's giving consent if they've been drinking, and it's even more difficult when you've been drinking too. It would be best to wait until you've sobered up to decide.
So another issue that involves consent in the law is sexting. Sexting means the sending of explicit digital images or videos, usually by cell phone. Sexting can also refer to exchanging of words, but for this lesson we're talking specifically about nude photos. So there are several reasons why a person may choose to sext. For example, some people choose sexting because they want to explore their sexuality. Or someone might choose sexting because it's an activity that doesn't have a risk of pregnancy or STIs. Or because they might feel pressured. So there are also several reasons why a person may choose not to sext. For example, someone might be concerned that the image may be easily shared with others, or that their parents can find the image. They also might be worried about some potential legal concerns. Sexting comes with some risks, and many of you may choose not to do it. However, there are some of you that may choose to sext at some point in your lives, or someone might send you a sext without your consent. So we're going to look at some scenarios and brainstorm how a person could keep themselves safe in these situations. So the first scenario is, there's a new student at school and you think they're kind of cute and might be interested in something with them. They get your number and text you, "Hey." You're not expecting that, so you text back, "Who is this?" The answer you get is, "It's me," followed by a naked picture of them. What should you do? So if someone sends you a naked picture without your consent, you can tell them not to, send anything else, block them, or tell a trusted adult. The second scenario is, you're in a relationship with someone and often sends texts talking about how attracted you are to each other. One day your partner texts, "How about sending me something I can look at and think of you?" You send a naked picture with the text, "Just for you, okay?" They text back how much they love it. The next day, 3 different people show you the picture on their phones. What should you do? So in this case, reporting is an option because distributing someone else's nude photos without consent is illegal.
You and your partner have been together for 6 months, and you sometimes send naked photos to each other. So you've never showed the photos to anyone else, and you promised you never would. But as the school year goes on, you decide that you want to end your relationship, but you're worried because you know your partner has those photos. What should you do? So a good idea is during the breakup, it might be a good idea to trade phones and delete the photos just so that no one has them anymore. So we want to make it clear that it is illegal for anyone over the age of 18 to have nude photos of someone under the age of 18. It's also illegal to share any nude photo without consent. Because we recognize that there are young people who choose to engage in sexting, we want to give you some advice to protect yourselves as much as possible. So before you hit send, make sure you know the recipient actually wants to receive it. That is, that the person consents to sexting with you. Don't send a nude photo before you've asked the other person and have both agreed to it. Make your expectations clear. Many people assume that if they send a message to someone they're dating or flirting with, it is somehow implied that the message was meant to be private, but that's often not the case. 1 in 4 sexts are forwarded to other people. If you're sending a sext, don't include your face and make sure that nothing in the picture, including the background, can identify you in case the photo ends up being shared with people who you don't want to see it. Here are some tips for the recipient. So never pressure anyone into sending a sext. If you receive a consensual sext, do not share the picture or text with friends or classmates. Understand that this is something you've been sent because the other person trusts you, so you should take that responsibility seriously. If you receive a non-consensual sext that makes you feel uncomfortable, ask the person not to send anything else or consider blocking them and talking with a trusted adult, especially if the person continues to text you.
So now I want to test your knowledge on consent. I'm going to read you a scenario and you're going to decide if it's consent or not. Ernesto and Karen have been dating and having sex for about a year. Ernesto has decided that he wants to go into the military next year and is worried about an unplanned pregnancy. He has decided he wants to stop having sex and Karen is hurt by this. Karen tries to seduce Ernesto and change his mind. Take a second and think about if this is consent or not. So this is not consensual because consent is reversible. Even if Ernesto has agreed to have sex before, he has the option to revoke his consent at any time he feels like it.
On to the next scenario. Jamie and Dakota have been dating for 6 months. One night, they're making out on Jamie's couch. They pause for a moment and smile. Dakota puts her hand on Jamie's cheek and they continue to kiss. We can infer that this is consensual. Jamie and Dakota are continuing to kiss and they pause for a moment to check in with one another.
So another scenario is, Charlie and Billy have been flirting, sexting, and sending nudes. They want to meet up in person, and since they've been explicit on their online activity, it's assumed they'll have sex. Is there consent here? So it's not consensual because consent has to be specific. If we go back to the S in fries, specific. While it seems both partners have consented to sexting, a person can't just assume that someone has consented to have sex.
Next, Sally and Darren have been dating and sexually active for a while, and they are in love. Darren arrives at a party one night to find Sally really drunk. Since they were planning on hooking up anyway that night, they have sex. This isn't consent because the scenario says that Sally is really drunk. When a person is drunk, they cannot give consent, even if the couple had been planning to have sex. The situation has changed since Sally cannot consent.
So Cameron and Stevie have been dating for a few months. They're messing around one afternoon while Cameron's parents are at work. As things start to get more serious, Cameron pauses and asks Stevie if they're ready to have sex. Stevie says yes. So this is a consensual example. Cameron is clearly seeking consent verbally, and Stevie is verbally consenting.
Our last piece of the lesson is called Protecting Self and Protecting Others. We would like to explore with you some things any of us could do to protect ourselves, protect a friend, or even help out someone we don't know in a harmful situation. So here are some strategies for protecting yourself. Know it is always okay to ask, can we slow down, or stop, or let's talk for a moment. Hang out with people you trust, especially if you are in a situation where people are drinking. Use the buddy system. Think about your boundaries and how far you are willing to go sexually. Then rehearse how and when you are going to communicate this with someone. Know what the laws are about consensual sex and age differences. And if you are interested in someone, think about respectful ways you might seek consent.
Now here's some strategies for protecting others. Speak up when you hear people making comments that show disrespect or disregard for consent. Let it be known that it's not cool. If you see someone who needs help, at a party, etc., do something. Make sure they are safe. If it's the opposite situation, a friend is trying to get with someone who's drunk or high, pull them aside and tell them what they're doing is wrong or illegal. Remember, the absence of no does not equal yes. Have conversations with your partner or friends about seeking out consent. And here's a slide reminding you one more time of things that are definitely not consent. If the person is drunk, high, asleep, refusing, or silent, there is no consent. Remember, if you're unsure your partner wants to continue, you should ask. If you're unsure that you want to continue, you should say so. If your partner doesn't seem into it, it's your responsibility to change the course of the activity.
Sometimes talking about consent is difficult. So we want to let you know about DVSAS and Skagit DVSAS, which are local resources who can provide free confidential information to young people if you or someone you know has a question or concern about an issue regarding consent or sexual assault. So currently their intention is to provide all of their core services virtually. They have a 24-hour helpline and an Ask an Advocate page on their website.
If you're interested in joining Teen Council next year, you can apply online at www.weareplannedparenthood.org/a/mbpp_tc_application. Or you can go ahead and scan that QR code or text TC app to 360-296-4390. Remember to follow us on Instagram so you can stay updated on what we're doing, or send us a private message with your questions.